Go ahead.
I am Brandon Mickelson, and I'm from Priest River. What I was wondering, in terms of science, how are you guys going to teach that at the high school level with evolution is really a main issue that I want to look at? Because I don't entirely feel like it is exact truth, but it's being taught that way. That's what I'm seeing. I feel like maybe we should not include it as such a big subject and more are we going to be focusing more on cell development, which is we know is truth, and DNA structures and things like that, or we'll be focusing on evolution in the biology standards?
Evolution, and I speak for my teacher committee of 15 professionals that are K-12 teachers plus higher ed teachers plus practicing stakeholders such as veterinary scientists and so forth. When we look at evolution, we use the definition adaptation. We're not talking about crawling out of the sea or I'm a monkey's uncle.
All right.
Evolution is to adapt. It's cold outside, I put a coat on. The flu virus will mutate this coming season. That's an adaptation. That's an evolution. So we stick to that. We don't.
Yeah, I was pointing specifically to Darwinian evolution.
Right.
We know adaptation
I understand.
exists, so.
Right. And good concern. Thank
All right.
you.
Maureen Patterson. Okay, in 2009, the scientific information on global warming was found to be an enormous lie. Hadley Climate Research Unit, CRU, at Britain's University of East Anglia, deliberately mixed the data temperatures to produce a graph of increasing global warming, hiding the actual decline of data temperature. The report on the data and analysis method was not published, as is usually done in scientific journals. Even worse, the peer review process by other scientists for weeding out flawed data and arguments was corrupted, and critics of the corruption were not allowed a hearing. This was a criminal act in which dozens of prominent scientists sought government money. Phil Jones, for one, raked in a total of $13.7 million in grants from the British government, which they then used to falsify data and defraud the taxpayers. Please refer to the state science standards on page 95, ESS2, HS2, in which the clarification statement says, examples should include climate feedback, such as how an increase in greenhouse gases causes a rise in global temperatures that melts glacial ice, etc. Whether it's called global warming or climate change, a huge problem besides the curriculum seems to be in the informational texts, once again, that the standards specify for each grade level. At a visit to my school, I saw many articles in their reading books where man-made climate change was presented as an absolute fact. Here's an example from a book by Lynn Cherry, How We Know What We Know About Our Changing Climate. It tells stories about how everyone can reduce the amount of carbon dioxide they put into the air. So is the real objective, besides scientists raking in taxpayers' money and supporting flawed data, to control people by using an erroneous excuse that reducing our carbon dioxide output is vital to the health of our environment? Then there's also the many articles throughout Common Core approved curriculum itself, and I saw this, on how important solar and wind energy is, and yet nothing about the benefits of other types of energy that I could find in those books. According to the Netherlands Times, just last month, they published that maintaining wind turbines costs more than what the generated energy brings in. So why are we lying to our children and teaching our children to lie, especially in distorting science to do it? What was wrong with the education of the 50s, where there was no informational text in the standards, much less 70% by high school? That era brought us outstanding scientists, a record number of U.S. patents being issued, major advances in medical science, polio vaccines, ultrasound, heart replacement surgery, space science, computers, semiconductors, and our education system was the envy of the world. We valued the classics and the 3 Rs. There was more local control and much less dictated from the state. Even though you say we have local control, the reality is that teachers are being evaluated on the Common Core tests, so they teach to the test, reducing their jobs to modules and a testing supervisor. And the schools by curriculum and informational texts that have Common Core in the title. Until the Department of Education returns to the common sense of the 50s of allowing teachers and parents to lead the charge, we will continue on this downward spiral. And I really question who came up with the 70% by high school of informational texts? How did they come up with this?
Just really quickly, I want to address the percentages of text that you've talked about, because it's really an important distinction and often misunderstood. The idea is in the early grades to have a greater split between narrative text, literature, and informational text. That is a percentage that is considered across the entire school day. So it's not as if the English teacher is not teaching Mark Twain and the classics and Shakespeare. So it's across the curriculum that we're talking about. So there's plenty of evidence that says, narrative writing and literature should be taught all the way through K-12. So those percentages are not in an English class. It's across the entire school day.
I understand
literacy.
I understand it. Why? Who came up with it? 70% by high school.
That's just a ballpark. It's not a hard and fast rule. It's just that as you get up into the high school years and you're thinking about a career as a scientist, as you're speaking of here, oftentimes that ability to analyze, generate complex informational text is very important for success. It's not to say that narrative writing isn't important. It continues to be important. But it is not this idea that the new standards in English do away with narrative writing and literature is absolutely not true. As a former English teacher, I would say that would have been my first vote in opposition had that been the case, and that's not true.
Why is this permeating through the curriculum? The climate change, the green, theory. Why is it? I mean, you go to almost any classroom and look through their curriculum. Why is it so predominant? It's erroneous, and yet it's there.
I can't speak to any particular curriculum that I haven't seen, so,
You have not looked at the curriculums that are coming out?
What curriculums? Specific ones?
For science. For the student. Are we not talking about science right now?
I thought you were talking about Common Core.
Common Core Science. Common Core Science.
You referred back to page 99, I believe it is, of these draft proposed standards.
Yes.
Okay.
Clarification statement.
And I'm looking at that page, and you're pulling it out of the core ideas in green or at the top specifically?
Does it say examples should include? Does it start that way?
And all I can say, just in the interest of time, is that we used what was called the frameworks of science. That is vetted by a committee of science professionals around the nation. And so before my committee convened last spring at this time, they looked at the frameworks of science, which was produced in 2012. And it's unfortunate, and it's like, yeah, it gets my goat when people are using non-vetted, non-peer-reviewed information, because it needs to be. That's what science is. We cannot take someone's opinion. It's fact. And so if that's the case, it's not legitimate. And if you want to send me that exact information, my committee is reconvening next month.
And the references are in the back.
Okay. And that we can take that under then consideration as we evaluate and edit these standards further.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Name? Linda Yergler. And I'm interrupting, I didn't sign up for anything, but I keep hearing about all these committees that are put together with professionals and teachers and educators and scientists and all of that. Do we have any parents and grandparents and Christians who have a whole different perspective of evolution and global warming and environmental issues than scientists do? Are they on any of these committees that are teaching our youth
Yes.
that millions and millions of Americans happen to, kind of believe in sometimes?
Yes.
Do you want to expound on that?
The committee is made up of K-12 teachers, stakeholders from business, industry, higher ed, and patrons. They have all backgrounds, Christians, non-Christians, different denominations, and they have to leave it behind and not bring it to the table
Exactly my point.
because we're looking at
That's the problem
science.
right there.
Separation of church and state.
Name?
Doug Patterson.
Where from?
Okay, you have these standards for science that you have amalgamated. They're sitting out here on the table that are significantly changed from what they were before. You just said that these, in at least great part, I assume great part, are from this group of people that you had come together and amalgamate these rules and get this standard going last year. The state of Idaho is, by your rules, about to be forced into buying new curriculums for science in virtually every school in the state. Okay, so the question becomes, what and where is the data that demonstrates conclusively that these new standards are superior than existing standards? That was the first question. How much money will the implementation of the new standards cost taxpayers of the state? Why do I find blatant efforts at indoctrination, for instance, relative to climate change is a good example, though there are others, that teach rather than the foundational science everywhere I look when I start looking through examples of stuff that's coming from the standards. Are these new standards written in the same top-down manner by the same elitist as the other Common Core standards, where the teachers, the very few teachers that were actually involved, actually walked away from the early Common Core stuff?
Do you want me to have him start answering those instead of going through all of
Before
them?
I lose track of your
Yeah,
first
because
set
he
of
will.
questions.
So,
They're written down. I already put in a copy.
okay.
But if
you want him to
yes,
answer?
Sure.
Go ahead, Scott.
First off, these particular standards you're referring to that were drafted last year by a committee of 15 members from throughout Idaho, they are not Common Core. They are the frameworks of science, separated, and so you can find them in the frameworks of science if you Google it and look at who they are, what their foundation is. Now, once we took the framework and used it as reference only, we as a committee then decided if, and this is an Idaho set of committee members, if this would meet Idaho standards produced by Idaho educators to promote better education for Idaho students.
I'm still waiting for the data.
And that's where you'd have to dig into the frameworks of science.
So no. A couple legislators have asked me to read bills, and I've read basically all the bills going through the legislature for the last 2 years, and I kept pretty close, particularly relative to education in the year before. And it's clear to me that the education department, in part for that tsunami of rule changes that he was talking about, the boards are making changes at a volume and rate that precludes scientific evaluation or conclusion. You simply cannot change all of the standards at once and say, I have a good result here, it's because of this. You don't know. You got too many things that you change. If you got a good result, you don't know where it's coming from. If you got a bad result, you likewise don't know where it's coming from. Good science does not allow there to be this many simultaneous changes of parameter. No one can possibly tell which of these changes are helping or hurting learning. Yeah. Yet these very same bureaucrats now demand new science standards. Are these endless changes about education or federal hoop jumping? Another question.
Let's stop right there. I have a letter from my committee that I'd like to hit some key notes on.
Sure.
And this is from the 15-member committee.
Okay.
And some of them hit upon the questions you're asking. What are the weaknesses of the current science standards? The committee believes science standards are currently in place for K-12 classrooms in Idaho. These standards are very broad and vague in nature. National and local evaluation of these current standards, Idaho standards, indicate a lack of clarity in the science content topic. This makes it very difficult to assess student achievement in these standards because there's no clear performance expectations embedded in them. Inquiry-based learning methods are a best practice in the field of science education, yet they are missing from Idaho's current science standards. Another valid criticism of the current science standards that are 25 years old is that they fail to adequately link math, English language, art practices to key science applications. Whereas I was a 20-year practicing teacher in a classroom, my students had to be literate in order to understand this foreign language of science. They needed to read, write, argue, discuss, collect data, evaluate data, draw conclusions. And so it takes other skills. And that's where we're actually then beefing up and adding rigor to those vague prior science standards. Standards should contain a plan, scope, and sequence of practices. And that's another thing we lacked, spiraling. Science, we have a foundation. Using tools is one example. From there, in kindergarten, what's a thermometer? Okay, here it is. Now we'll spiral it up. Now this was lacking in the old standards on what it could be used for. We still have high school students on a regular basis using that tool that was introduced in kindergarten. So the new standards take that into reference, that we spiral from the foundation up. You need a foundation of understanding before you jump in to be a doctor, medical doctor. So that's where we're going. My committee also says, why do we need to revise our science standards? They say science as a practice is dynamic in nature. Our current science standard document was originally adopted in 2001 with significant changes in the interim. In the last 15 years, there's been significant advancement in science and technology. Yes, we're in a changing world. Technology was already brought up. We can't keep up. Therefore, adopted science standards are necessary. Science classrooms offer a unique opportunity for students to practice 21st century learning skills that will enable them to be more productive in their future endeavors. When comparing our current standards with the revised science standards, it becomes clear that the document does not contain new content, but is instead driven by a new approach to teaching that content. So what they just said right there is, the old standards had the content, they didn't have the pedagogy, which is the science of teaching. So now we're taking the content and helping the student better understand so it will last. It will be with them instead of just, hey, let's throw out a lab and look at some earthworms and now we're done. We'll never touch on that subject again.
All sounds fine. I don't doubt it's a great idea, but before the state spends, let's see, the budget this year was
And I agree, unmandated
billion,
changes
I think of
are not valid. I mean, unfinanced mandated changes are not valid.
So we're spending this huge amount of money chasing, the road to hell is paved with good ideas and concern. But if you don't get data, use science to verify that these changes that you're saying need to be done actually work in the field. You're talking to a guy with 14 patents.
I respect that, I respect you, and I agree with you.
So, thank you.
Invite to first districts throughout the state, because I need a general populace throughout. I don't want to just confine it to the Treasure Valley. And so once it gets to that particular superintendent or principal, they may have who they believe to be a rock star teacher, has many years of experience, and has showed through their practices that they are a great science teacher. I get recommendations, and so I go from there, and I look for elementary experts, middle school experts, high school experts, and I cannot forget about higher ed, because that's where it is being taught to the next generation of teachers. And so I bring those in for sure. And then the stakeholders. I ask Micron, and they can sit at the table. I ask Idaho National Lab, they can sit at the table. They can tell us what their needs are. We want to keep Idaho students in Idaho. So it's
Right. So it's the department's decision, and thereby yours. You're selecting who's on that committee by gathering these applicants.
I would say it's not my decision, but I have influence upon that decision.
But it would be under the department.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
With our standards, and that's why they are posted, so that you can understand, but it's like, who is going to sit and digest 100 pages of standards? Problem is, it's K through 12. And so if your particular son or daughter is in earth science in 8th grade, you can pick out just that earth science and fathom it through that particular snippet.
But you have to know they're out there, and parents that are working 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day,
Right.
trying to make a living and raise 3 kids or whatever.
And we're doing a better job of being
baseball.
transparent. Sherry Ybarra is all about transparency.
Yeah, they need to know. They need to know that this is coming down the pike. And just to explain, the separation of church and state is not to keep church or religion out of the government, it's to keep the government out of church religious.
Right.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Nick Hoffman. I taught in the Wallace School District since 1981. I retired this year. Because of the way the discussion has gone, I do want to mention I'm also an elder in my church. And I'm speaking in support of the standards. I've been around forever. I thought it was funny when you mentioned about this new thing called mastery learning, because the first thing I was given in 1981 in my school district was a mastery learning handbook. So it's not a new thing, it's the cycle.
Newly funded.
It's newly funded, I agree with that, because it wasn't funded when we were doing it. But I very much support these. I worked with the old standards, and the fact that you could go from elementary and there was the 5th grade on weather, and that was the last time you talked about weather. And it wasn't good. I appreciate the fact that you built off the next generation science standards framework. I saw that coming because I tried to keep up with that kind of stuff. And when you compared the next generation science standards with the standards I was working with in my classroom every day, they weren't even close. We were teaching fact, and very little application. I do have a concern about the standards only in that there's so much process in the standards that you can't test in a meaningful way. And that concerns me. I think there needs to be some more thought in how we're going to do that. The current DRC science test, I was on the committee that helped write the original set of questions. And I was concerned back then about the fact that you couldn't test the scientific method in a meaningful way except what are the steps, which doesn't do anything as far as science is concerned. So I'm happy that the controversial stuff is in there. I really am excited as a student that you're here. That's very cool, because you need to be involved in your learning and your education. So I'm excited about that. I just think it's a good sequence. I like the sequence. The concern about the global warming issue and the evolution issue are addressed really well in the point there where you're allowed to discuss that in the ELA standards. Take the information you have, come up with a competent argument for or against. That was always important in my class. As a church elder, I felt a little handcuffed about being able to talk about my religion in class, and I didn't believe it was appropriate. And if a student would ask me that, I would tell them that. I said, if you want to talk about the creation science end of things, you need to talk to a pastor or somebody that has more background in that than I do. But I like the idea that you can discuss it that way. My discussion about evolution in my science class was always, I don't care if you necessarily believe it, But if you're going to argue against it, you need to understand it. So, it's the same thing with the global warming stuff. If you have evidence that tells that this is different, I'd always give my students a chance to bring that up. But the basis, the science is important enough that I think they need to know it, whether they're going to believe that particular thing or not. And science is always going to be controversial. There's the people in Great Britain are editing human embryos right now with a new technique. Is that controversial? You're darn right it is. But you don't understand what they're doing if you don't understand the process. So I'm excited about the depth here. Wasn't not excited enough to keep teaching, sorry, but after 35 years. But I'm excited about the depth and where it's going. My school district never saw even the old standards as a curriculum. I knew, because I helped write the test, I knew what my kids were going to be tested on, but I never taught to that. I taught to cellular respiration because it was important. And if I did it well, the kids would remember it. And I don't know if my school district's unique, it sounds like it a little bit, but they always trusted me as a professional to do my job. And our test results showed that my students were understanding at a level a little bit higher than the state average was, which was good. I was excited for them because of that. So as much as there's controversy and science is built on that, I honestly believe that, challenging the students is a better benefit for the future than the standards we had before. And from a personal level, I'm frustrated that the legislators didn't think we had enough time to do these comments the first time around. They should have. Why did they pull that set out? I have my own personal opinions on why that was. But there's no reason, there's nothing in here that couldn't have been dealt with and then just let the teachers do their job. Because I don't think there's a science teacher out there that's going to tell somebody you can't believe that evolution is false. But I think there's a lot of teachers out there that would say, give me your reasoning. So I appreciate the chance to do this. I'm excited to see you guys out of your office. So when you go back, tell Sherry, thank you very much for letting you guys loose. And I know a few years ago that was not going to happen. So thank you very much for that.
From a veteran teacher from the trenches, what you say carries much weight, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yes, we as a committee believe we have a better product, and it's there to guide everyone, the parent, the student, the teacher. We color-coded, and we had discussions about the color key. If I look at the color copies, why? And it's like, again, to make it user-friendly. And it's just because it's not easy. Being a science teacher, it's not easy being an educator. So we are there to assist. And I'm glad you also identified, instead of as fact, regurgitate the fact on the test. Now it's changing, and how do we assess that? And that's what you're hitting upon. That is the next dilemma. DRC, our vendor, says they have contracts with other states that are doing different assessment methods, like open item assessments, where it's performance-based. I look forward to that, given the time constraints on assessment. But again, I'm glad also to hear that you were involved with test authoring.
And I can tell you, I'm also our district our testing coordinator for one more year.
Nice.
And yeah, there's way too much testing going on.
Right.
So,
No.
But a competent science test would be so much better than, I like, the test we're doing now is the test we have.
Mm-hmm.
But as a competent science test, we have a ways to go yet.
Right.
Well, okay. Hi, I'm Kathleen Clayton. I'm going to talk to her issue later. Okay. When I was in school, we learned the scientific method. Do you still do that? You know
Scientific method I will address in that. Scientific method, when I first came out of the classroom as a greenhorn, meant, oh heck. Observation, hypothesis, experiment, conclusion. There's more to science than that. But that's the basics. And that's kind of where we start with the first grader. Make an observation. Let's go outside and look at the sunrise. Let's watch the temperature rise with it. So observation, hypothesis. Hey students, what do you think's going on? Why is it cooler in the shade? Experiment. Let's try something. Let's compare sun versus shade. And a conclusion, we want the students to walk away with something learned. So yeah, scientific method will never go away. Getting two scientists to agree on the exact scientific method is impossible. So it is there.
Okay, so if you said to someone, develop a model that shows locust-caused malaria, would you say that was a good lesson to teach kids?
Boy, you're putting me on the spot. Locust-caused malaria.
Yeah, everybody.
That is a valid question.
All the scientists
And
have
I would
decided that
then-
locust-caused malaria.
That's a great open-ended question for a student in the research. So I'd say sure, yes.
But you're already making a conclusion in your question there.
How's that?
Because you're saying they cause malaria. Now,
No, I didn't. Oh.
Now prove it.
Oh, okay.
Now
No,
show.
I don't know if it does or
It
not.
doesn't say prove it. Just
Yeah.
show that they do that.
Students will
And-
have to do the research,
But you're supposed to show that they do. See, so that I think.
but they may not.
Right. So on H6 here, that students are supposed to use a computational representation to illustrate the relationships among the Earth's systems and explain how those are being modified. They're supposed to show that human activity causes global warming. They're not supposed to say, does human activity cause global warming?
That's a wonderful verbiage change, and please submit that.
Okay. All right, because I even have a book. I guess I could put it online because I know the book. I read the book. It's How Fossil Fuels Help Man, and it says that there are scientists that are not convinced that the global warming is it might be happening, it might be cooling, but it might not be caused by man, and there's arguments for and against. So I'm concerned that our current administration, nothing to do with it, I hope that it is the federal government, is trying to punish people who disagree with the climate change theory, and it wouldn't be right, because you're supposed to keep an open mind, and maybe somebody could prove one way and somebody could prove another.
Oh, yeah.
So
I agree. It's a hot
okay.
topic.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Comment to the gifted lady that you do for the gifted. One thing that you could tell people is we had 4 children, and 3 children went into the gifted program. And the most successful child is the one who did not go into the gifted program. And the oldest one who went in is not very successful. So it doesn't always, it's nice, and it's maybe helpful, and other children can do just as well. Because we felt really bad. The youngest one didn't get in the gifted program, but he turned out just fine.
We have there's a large percentage of gifted children who don't graduate from high school, which is a big concern of mine. But we're not talking about standards about gifted education,
No.
so I can't give you anything
No,
specific
but I was
to
just
go on.
saying that for reference. Thank you.
All right. I'm Brandon Mickelson, but my comment was, as a student, I really feel that more of the critical thinking and research on both ends of a question that you're given is really a better way to learn, because that way you get the student that's critically thinking through the process and both arguments and saying, well, which one has better arguments, which ones have more facts that support the conclusion, and then come to their own conclusion about it. I'm going through a college math class right now that is just basically presenting the theorems, and here, perform this theorem as we tell you. And that's not really helping me learn. I'm not getting an understanding of all the material. Now, critically thinking through it and showing how the application of those theorems to the real world really would help me understand the material, and I could learn it better. And as a student, I really feel like more of that critical thinking and understanding of the material and getting your own conclusions really prepares you more for life than just memorizing facts and figures.
Thank you.
I hear what you're saying, and problem solving is wonderful. It is the next order step in learning. And we've implemented the senior project, which also falls back on a problem, an issue. What can you do as a senior? And yes, now science is kind of changing that way to go more with that next level of higher order thinking.
That's my wife.
Yes.
I'm from Sagal, Idaho. I got some problems with our education system when you go to a college campus and they can't even tell you who the president of the United States, the first president of the United States was. And they can't tell you what the capital of Afghanistan is, and they can't tell you this, that, and the other. Our education system is falling down as far as I'm concerned. Another thing, and this is political, you got this Bernie Sanders running around